Welcome to Vision Chats at Johns Hopkins, where the only thing that matters in the next hour is the future. Priyali, I am so excited to have you with me today. You are an award-winning journalist, a documentary filmmaker, a TEDx speaker, a social development entrepreneur. You've done so much in your lifetime, but probably I'm guessing that one of your most important roles is a lifetime advocate for um, fighting gender violence and for social justice issues. And I cannot wait to start embarking this conversation with you today. But first, I am just dying to know, how did you end up doing what you're doing today, and how has your own life design journey landed you to where you are today?
Farouk, thanks for having me on the Vision Chat. I think this is an amazing series and it has wonderful, diverse guests. So I'm really happy and honored to be here. Uh, how did I get to doing what I love to do, which is support uh, gender rights and the fight against gender-based violence? You know, when you grow up in India, which is a very patriarchal society, even though I grew up with lots of privileges, I went to a good school. I come from an upper middle class family. Despite all the privileges that I grew up with, patriarchy is something which is stark on your face and a stark reality as you grow up in India. So it's something which cannot be pushed under the carpet. You grow up with it. You see it at every step. You see it even when you go to schools. You know, me and my parents have two daughters, me and my older sister. And even as I was growing up as a little girl, every time we would go to uh, people's houses and they'd say, "Oh, you two sisters, not a brother? It's all right, doesn't matter." And I'd be like, it's actually pretty good that we are two sisters. So, you know, when you grow up with these ideas of, the gender bias and the difference in how people look at girls and boys and men and women, you kind of automatically, subconsciously get drawn to the fight for gender rights. Um, in terms of gender-based violence, um, you know, like, there are 1 in 3 women in the world who have been survivors of gender-based violence. And I myself have been a survivor of gender-based violence. So I think that kind of pushed me to work more and get more voices of gender-based violence survivors out there to share their stories, to tell their stories. So first I did that as a journalist. I would do stories about women who had been survivors, who had faced domestic violence, or who had been sexually abused. And then I kind of got drawn towards the policy side. I was like, it is good to share these stories and I want to continue to share because it has an impact on the ground, but I also want to do something which, can be in shaping the policy in terms of having an impact on the ground. So that's what kind of drew me into this field. And that's how I am here doing what I do.
Yeah, and you ended up starting the Azadi Project, working on behalf of women and girls refugees. And we're now in this COVID era, and which is probably changing. I know it's changing trends and the impact on all of us today. But I can only imagine that it's changing life for refugees as well. Tell us a little bit about how that's going.
So, just before we get to the pandemic and how that's impacting lives of refugee women or just generally lives of women, and, the challenges that women and refugee women have faced during the pandemic, I want to talk about why I was drawn specifically to work towards, to work especially with refugee women. When we talk about intersectional bias, or when we talk about how different kinds of biases or different kinds of intersectionalities marginalize a certain category, refugees, or specifically refugee women, fit into that category and are one of the most marginalized communities. They're not only women on the move, they are mostly women of color. They have been displaced from their houses, they've been displaced from their countries, displaced from their communities, and they're now in a new country or a new land looking for opportunities. And they mostly come from very conservative societies. So the kind of intersectional bias that refugee women face is really harsh. And I think that's what drew me towards working with them. Now, given when we talk about COVID-19 and the pandemic, I again want to bring in the intersectionality factor. Yes, women have been impacted. I mean, both men and women have been impacted by COVID-19. You know, our world has changed. The fact that we are having the Zoom conversation and not an in-person conversation is a testament to that. Like, everything has changed, right? So COVID-19 or the pandemic has affected everybody, but how has it impacted, or how much more has it impacted certain communities or certain groups of people? And again, in that case, refugee women have been very much impacted by COVID-19. You know, we talk about lockdowns impacting us, you know, but we have the capability of either going out and to buy our groceries, going out to get our pharmacy, going out to get our medicines. Refugee women or refugees in a camp, especially the camp where we work, the Moria camp in Greece, which is in the island of Lesbos, one of the biggest camps and one of the worst camps. Refugees have been in lockdown for months and they cannot go out to access supplies. Firstly, they don't have the money to access to go to pharmacies and buy supplies. But even if they do have a little bit of money, they cannot go to a pharmacy to buy basic hygiene and essential items like sanitary pads, like soaps, like alcohol wipes. So this is something which we wanted to do in terms of my nonprofit, which is the Azadi Project. We thought that at this point, we wanted to do something which was the most essential and most urgent need on the ground, through which we would be able to make these refugee communities, and specifically women, at least get by their day-to-day life and feel protected in a pandemic. When we talk about physical distancing or we talk about social distancing, these are people who are living in close quarters. These are people who are using, like 60 people using one toilet, 60 people using one shower, one tap for 1,300 people. How can we even talk about physically or socially distancing? And on top of that, you don't even give them the basic necessities to take a soap or take a sanitary pad and go to the toilet. So the minimum that we could do was to try and build a movement or build a campaign where we could leverage our networks and bring in people to support the cause. So what we've been able to do during a pandemic, some of us sitting in Delhi, for example, me, some of my other team members sitting in DC, somebody in Athens, someone in San Francisco, what we could do during the pandemic was use our online community, make the most of what the pandemic put for us, which is using technology. The pandemic pushed us to go virtual, pushed us to not have the physical contact. So we decided, if that's what it is, we're going to leverage that and make use of that. So we built an online campaign and we said, whichever part of the world you are, you can donate a hygiene kit to a woman in Lesbos. So when international borders were actually shut, we managed to get supplies of sanitary napkins, of alcohol wipes, of soaps, and get these across to the women. And not just women, we also incorporated men in this so that we could have men go out, and refugee men go out and talk about the importance of hygiene and also menstrual hygiene for women. So yeah, that's what we've been able to do during the pandemic.
I found that actually really interesting in some of your talks online and in your TEDx talk in particular, that you're inviting men into the conversation and into action too. And part of that process of inviting men into it is recognizing, certainly some of the flaws that men bring into it, but also I think you bring in the whole conversation that perhaps is controversial in some circles of forgiveness, or and forgiveness doesn't mean that saying it's okay what happened, but to uh, to give a way to men to redeem themselves in a way. This was a huge part of one of your TEDx talks, and it sounds like also it generated some buzz too. Is that right?
That's right. So the first TEDx talk that I did, it was about, it was, I think it was called having men in the fight for gender equity, involving men for the fight for gender equity. I think that's been something which has been a driving force in all the work I do. I feel gender equity or gender equality is not just about women, and it cannot be achieved just with women. And it has to be a unified approach. It has to be an approach where men and women support each other for gender equity. And when I talk about forgiveness, I want to go back into what forms or what informs the behavior of men in our society today. Nobody is born. I mean, people are, if there's a man who's born into a patriarchal society in India, he's informed by the patriarchal society in India. It is the society which is bringing him up with certain stereotypical norms. There is an entire, when we talk about toxic masculinity, this is what it is. It is the kind of information that is being fed into young boys, into teenagers, into adolescents, about how you should be as a man, what is right for you to do as a man. You cannot be soft, you cannot cry, you treat women in a certain way. So I think we have to not just, when we talk about gender equity, we have to break that link. I think we have to start at the basic level of educating boys and girls that it is okay for women to be a certain way, and it is okay for young boys to be a certain way. There is no certain stereotypical norm that boys have to be hard, boys cannot be soft, or girls have to be soft and girls cannot be go-getters. I think these stereotypical norms have to be broken. So when I spoke in my TEDx talk about forgiving men or giving men a second chance, I wanted to talk about men who've grown up in these stereotypical societies, in these toxic environments which have made them like this. But there are lots of men who are trying to change that, who are wanting to change that, who want to join this fight. And I think it is important that we as women recognize that men want to be a part of this as well, and invite them to join the fight, instead of always calling them the perpetrators and isolating ourselves and isolating them.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, and I think what's interesting is, as I hear you speak about this, is I'm hearing systems and stories that have the context in India, but I'm also um, easily thinking about other cultures that I've interacted with or I've grown up in and also live in now, and some of these patterns and these societal expectations are universal too. And as I can only imagine that as a person, as a professional in the field of media and journalism, you probably have seen the impact of media has on just culture in general, and how it sets up some of these gender norms and what is acceptable and what is not. And then also, I wonder what's changing today in media that perhaps is helping or maybe hurting. Um, as an expert in that, what are you thinking?
Farouk, when we talk about the US, and I lived there for almost 6 years. My husband is an American. Um, uh, just a side note, we met on International Women's Day. so, so anyway, but I lived in the US for 6 years, and if you look at the incidence of gun violence, which is a major issue in the US, we always talk about how it is boys, men, who are carrying out the episodes of gun violence or the incidents of gun violence.
Yeah, I've always wondered why that is.
So what is pushing them to do this? What is the kind of culture are we bringing up our boys and men in? Why are we saying that, guns are macho? Guns are, give you a sense of power, that boys, and men have to be a certain way. Like, what is it about our culture, whether it be India, be the US, or anywhere else in the world, which distinguishes between this? Even if you go to a toy shop, you know, the kind of toys that you have for boys and the kind of toys you have for girls is very gendered. So I think it is important that we realize these things at a very basic level, at a very elementary level, and start by taking small steps to change that. I think your question was also about how can the media inform that, right?
Yes.
I mean, the media, if we talk about journalists, I think the media has done a fair amount of work when just the fact that I told you about the gun violence and the fact that so many number of people who carry out these incidents of gun violence are mostly boys and men is because of a podcast that I heard, which was interviewing a man who had done an entire research on this. So I think media, in terms of news media or popular media, is playing its role. I think in terms of advertising, we need to be a little bit more careful. I think in terms of advertising, the messages we send out is very important, that we send out a non-gendered messaging. But I do think it's gradually changing. For example, the campaign, which was 2 years ago, Run Like a Girl, I thought that was a brilliant campaign. You know, it shows about how women and girls should be out there in the sports, how they love to be on the field. So I think it is slowly evolving and changing, but we just need to give it some time.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's happening now with media, especially, is that many of us, or most of us, are forced to consume more media than before, because we're in confinement, we're at home, we're those of us with access to internet, and there are a lot of us who have access to internet, are not only on Zoom calls, but are watching videos and are on social media and are consuming a lot of it today. And it's forcing us, perhaps for the first time in a long time, or perhaps ever, to deal with some of the demons of this society from a social justice issue. I think of George Floyd, for example, is not the first Black man to be murdered by the law enforcement, and yet the reaction was certainly, in my opinion, more intense than I have seen before. In one of the recent vision chats that I've had, I've actually asked the guest about that, and what he said is that it's because for the first time we were all forced to sit down and watch the whole thing, that and we had time to process it and to get angry about it and to reflect upon it and to risk our lives to walk outside in protest, even though we were supposed to hide from this virus. It pushed us to our limits because we were forced to watch it. I wonder if the same is happening or might happen around gender violence issues. I've said in several meetings now that I feel like we're just one spark away from the Me Too movement coming back again in full force, as it should. And now with the selection of a vice president candidate who is a woman of color, I feel like it's just the women issues are just around us all the time, and I feel like we're just one spark away from that becoming a major movement. For the same reason, is because we are all forced to deal with some of the worst diseases of this country, the United States, and of this world. So in a way, I think media might help us with that. Are you seeing the same impacting? I mean, I know you're in the business of storytelling, and you're using storytelling to tell the stories of refugee women and girls. And from previous conversations you and I have had, you even putting your own life at risk at times in just going to film some of these stories in camps. You're seeing that also, that trend that that this is happening in society, and that we're maybe a spark away from catching the attention of the world?
Farouk, I think I'm an optimist, at least when it comes to this, and I'm hopeful. When is the last time we spoke about a woman of color, a daughter of a migrant woman, an Indian Black American being nominated for the Vice President of the United States? So
Yeah.
I'm very hopeful and I'm very optimistic that things are moving in the right direction. But yes, will there be another Me Too movement? And should there be another Me Too movement? I think the spectrum of gender-based violence is so broad that one Me Too is not enough to kind of address that. I think we need many Me Toos. We need to keep this in the consciousness of our society, in the consciousness of everyone, that this is something which is extremely prevalent in our everyday life. When we put a statistic, 1 in 3 women have been a victim of violence or is a survivor of violence, that means something. It's not just a number. It means that every other woman that you see walking on the street, which is now not possible, you don't see them walking on the street, but every third woman that you see has in some way or the other been a survivor of violence. It could be emotional violence, it could be verbal abuse, it could be sexual abuse or physical abuse. So that number, as repeatedly I keep saying, means something. There's a face to that, there's a name to that, there's a woman to that. So yes, we need many, many Me Too movements to actually, and I think only after that there's going to be a real change in the social fabric. But in terms of the pandemic, I again want to come back to how the pandemic has impacted women, and not just refugee women. I've been doing stories about how COVID-19 is playing out in India, and I've also been reading how the media has been reporting in the US. The pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women. And this is not in terms of health, because in terms of health, you will see, or in terms of the numbers and the data, you will see that men have been more, have been more susceptible to get coronavirus, right? To be COVID-19 positive. But how has the pandemic, or how has COVID-19 disproportionately impacted women? Most of the women, most of the caregiving roles, or most of the cleaning roles around the world are done by women. So when we talk of COVID-19, we talk of hygiene, we talk of sanitation. Who are these people who are going out on the streets and cleaning, who are going out to the homes and cleaning? Who are the manual scavengers? Who is clean, going door to door, carrying out these works? In India, lots of sanitation workers are women, and they did not have enough protective gear to go out and do their work. So most of them were putting their lives on risk to go out there. The other day, I read a report in the Washington Post. It said that of all the pregnant women in the US who have been COVID-19 positive, more than 50% of the pregnant COVID-19 positive women are Latina women of Hispanic origin. Now, why is that? It is because Latina women are mostly undocumented in the country. They don't have access to health services. Even if they want to go to healthcare services, they are scared that ICE is going to come after them. And secondly, all of them, at least a majority of them, are in cleaning services, or they're doing caregiving roles. They are working with rich families, taking care of the older people there. So these women are either cleaners, they are caregivers, they are unpaid or very meagerly paid, and putting themselves out there in the field during COVID-19 without proper protection. And so they are highly at risk. So women have been very disproportionately impacted, at least on this front. And then many of them have even lost their jobs because they have to take care of their families at home. Now the men are not going out to work, so who's going to stay at home and take care of the men and the children? Children are not going to school. Children have to study online. It is the women on whom the burden of all of this is falling. So when we talk about the pandemic impacting women, it has been a huge impact on women. And so going forward, the things we have to do is to make sure that understand the realities of what the COVID-19 world or the poses for us, and how we move forward, keeping all of this in mind, and making sure that we, in everything that we design, in everything that we draft, every policy that we come up with, we have a gender lens to that.
I think what you're turning so many wheels on for me. I appreciate it, Priyali. One of them is um, a life design wheel, because I think what most people don't realize when they think of migrant women, refugees, and actually, women and men for that reason. So even families and their children, said these are people who are not going through a relocation process. I think most of us, or a lot of people, as when we talk to them, that we fail as a society to empathize with the journey that a person goes through, to literally pick up what they have and leave everything behind and go on a one-way ticket to a destination that they don't know, to usually a place that they don't know, speaking a language that they don't know, a culture that they don't know, and have to start over. And that is a process that, I mean, it takes time. Sometimes it takes actually just really sitting down and really making an effort to truly empathize with that journey. This is not a relocation process. It really is um, a process of fleeing everything you know. Just try to imagine that. I invite all of the people who are watching to really just close their eyes and think about that. Like, imagine you have to leave everything behind, pick up what you can, and you go to a destination that is completely uncertain. And that is a process of designing your life, like for them, that's the context, is that they're fleeing war, they're fleeing abuse, they're fleeing terrible economic and societal situations. You have to reach a certain point in your life where you feel like, I can no longer do this. My life depends on it, and I have to go. And then that designing your life is, you're really moving from a place of escaping of fear and escaping challenges and pursuing some type of inspiration, and taking immense risks to go in that direction, only to be met with complete misunderstanding on the other side, and treating people like they are here to they are here to take something away from us. So and that makes me think of the people who are caged on the border, in in recent years, but in the United States, refugees who you work with. So I mean, I think it really just kind of goes back and start with just a process of empathy, that these are human beings who are designing their lives in a completely different way, and and are being very courageous to get there.
Yeah, so Farouk, I think you point out a very, very crucial point. And in everything you said the risk they take. So I'm going to focus on that.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, and I'm going to focus on it from the point of view of a migrant or a refugee woman. This is in no way taking away from the struggles of a migrant man or a refugee man, but just to highlight what a refugee woman or migrant woman goes through. So the woman who shows up in the southern borders of the US, or a woman who shows up on the islands of Greece, or somebody who's trying to cross from Libya into Italy by crossing the Deadly Sea or the Mediterranean Sea with tiny dinghies, which are going to sink most likely, and in most cases they do sink, if they are not trying to flee something worse than trying to risk their lives, or trying to be susceptible and vulnerable to traffickers raping them not once, but multiple times. And this is what I have heard from people, from refugee women who've confided and shared their stories, that along the way, how many times they have to approach smugglers, have to approach traffickers to make them cross a border, to get them on the dinghy. Sometimes they get onto the boat and it sinks. They have to come back and again make a payment. How much do you think it costs for them to get on the boat? It is not cheap. It costs above $3,000 for each person to get onto that boat. And how do these people get that money? They put in everything they have, all their life savings to get that money. And even after that, sometimes they can't cross. And during that process, so many times women get raped, repeatedly raped, sent to prison, in the prison, again raped, and then when they come into the country, or whichever host country when they come into, and start trying to learn the language of the host country, start trying to give back to the community by saying, okay, here, now I'm here, I'm going to learn your language, I'm going to try and assimilate with you, I'm going to integrate with you, I'm going to try and be a part of you, because I want to live a life which is dignified and which also has human rights with it. And then you look back at these people and you call them migrants, economic migrants, trying to take away from you instead of seeing how much they're trying to give you. So I think it's important to put perspective from where they come, what they leave behind, what they risk to come to a safe place.
Indeed, and you're really highlighting that audacious move. So when I speak about life design in general, what I'm talking about is the concept of inspiration, and the audacity to make a move that it is really risky. But I'm usually not talking about this level of risk. And what I often say is that, but in order to take that level of risk, or any level of risk, you need a tremendous amount of support, often in the form of mentoring, but also in other forms. And here I'm talking about, risks that college students need to do to create their own life prototypes, like start a startup or anything. We're not talking about getting on a boat and possibly losing your life and so the risks that you're talking about are just immense. And again, I just want to remind people that it takes a certain, it just takes an awful context and background to push you to that level. And if once you reach that level, then in order to really make it and take so much risk, you need a lot of support. These refugees, these people who are crossing borders, who are with their children, who are risking their lives, who are going to places where they don't know the culture or the language or have any type of support, they need mentors. They need people to guide them through this process. They need people who can get them supplies. It's basically getting help them start their life over. I had an opportunity to do some mentoring actually for refugees. This was part of a program that was part of the State Department, and connected personally with some refugees who came to the United States at that level. And it is just, it is so humbling, and it is also awful to hear some of the stories of what people have had to go through to get to this point. And then now you're just helping them just get started by the simple process of knowing what paperwork to go and ask for, how to get an apartment, getting some basic furniture, necessities, getting their kids registered at school. And by the way, no one speaks the language in most of these families. So you're trying to mentor them and break barriers of language and of culture, etc. And these are the lucky ones who were able to be matched. So you think of so many people who are still doing this on their own. This is a big part, I know, of your campaign and of your project and of your work, is to offer that level of support to refugees.
Yeah. Farouk, I want to get to that, but I just see like somebody is typing a question repeatedly. So maybe I'll just respond to that and then get back to your answer.
Yeah.
I think the question that this person is asking, and has asked it twice, so that's why I'm jumping into this. And Farouk, feel free to put your thoughts into this as well. It's, can you please address the role of popular music and lyrics that degrade women? Very young children around the world sing and repeat lyrics that promote mistreatment of women. Additionally, would like to hear your views on the impact of violent and quite popular video games that during this pandemic are being played at record numbers. I mean, I think this is a key problem that this person who has put this question out there has raised. I think our popular music artists need to be ambassadors, because they are in pop culture and people, listen to them, look up to them, and children, without even understanding the lyrics, actually repeat these lyrics, and what kind of impact that ultimately has on them is something probably I'm not a psychologist or a psychotherapist, but I can only imagine how that is shaping their ideas or thoughts, because some of these lyrics are really brutal and violent and very dehumanizing towards women. So what my opinion is that yes, there should be something, or there should be at least, I mean, it may contradict with freedom of speech, but everyone will say everybody should have the right for freedom of speech, whatever they want to say in terms of art, in terms of, but I think there should be a certain level of sensitivity which every artist should kind of personally adhere to. So that's my take on that.
Yeah. I'm in agreement with that, and I think what I want to add to it is, in conversations like these, like with any other conversations, I want to start from a place of empathy first, and I want to know what has pushed that artist to write such language, or to use this form of expression, and use language that way. And I think what you find is that sometimes artists are expressing um, experiences and thoughts of their own upbringing. I think, I mean, I have seen actually interviews with artists who would say that, who believe themselves, whether we agree with them or not, that they're not using their art to propagate and to promote violence against women, that they're actually just putting a spotlight on it, that this is the reality in our streets and in our society, and they have grown up in it and they have seen it and they want to shed light on it. And there's perhaps agreement or disagreement about the way to do this, but their mode of expression is to write a song or lyrics and to turn that into music that is then consumed and purchased. And it's a form of potentially raising awareness that, and the forms can be really questionable. Could it be a poem, or a music video that pushes our buttons? But I know that that is that is a thought process that's out there. And I mean, the one thing that I know probably most of us agree on is the protection of freedom of expression, and that we personally, as someone who has lived in societies that have pushed for censorship, I would not want that, because once you go down that road, then you're opening the door to censor everything else. So I'd rather give that artist the right to write that language, even if I disagree with it, and I wouldn't want my own children to listen to it, for the sake of protecting my own rights to express myself.
Absolutely, Farouk. And again, this comes back to exactly what we were discussing before, right? That we change this at a very elementary level. Like, we change this with young boys and girls. We change this at the very elementary level by changing these ideas about, what is the male thing to do? What is the macho thing to do? Is it talking about women like this? This is not the right way to talk about women or girls. This doesn't make you cool. So maybe start that at a very basic level, and then hopefully, it changes with time. So, and again, I completely support what you said, which is, you don't want censorship. I think it has to be a personal responsibility to kind of be sensitive to these issues.
And I have seen it where some artists, they start that path, but then eventually grow into artists that feel more of that personal responsibility and social responsibility to say, I now have a platform and I can see how this impacts children. So I'm going to not tone it down, but just redirect my artistic energy in a different way for a positive impact. Maybe sometimes it's when they have children that they realize that they wouldn't want their own kids to listen to this, so they have to be more careful. So I think that is there is certainly something to think about as we consider the impact of media on social justice issues and gender violence issues. All right, so it looks like Priyali is freezing on us a little bit. While we get her back, I'll continue talking a little bit about the process of designing our lives and how that looks different and is experienced differently by different people from their own context. That is, I think, usually the failure of understanding for a lot of people is that for some people designing their life means figuring out what you want to do with your life, and for others is to figure out how to flee the context, the violent context that you are in. And I think if we start with a play from a place of understanding and empathy, then we can start to really think about the structures that need to be in place in education, in politics, in society, to create a more equitable environment that allows everyone to have the same access and support for people to design their lives the
I'm
way.
sorry. I'm sorry, my video has turned off because we lost, there's no electricity in my house right now.
That's
So,
okay. That's okay. We're glad to have you back. So while you were gone, I was talking about the equity element of designing our lives and how that is experienced differently by different people in different contexts around the world. Whether it's a person trying to flee their own environment of violence, to a privileged person who is trying to think of what to major in and what college degree to get and what to do with their own lives. And it is certainly experienced in different ways. We're glad to have you back, Priyali. There, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Farouk. Sometimes in there's been electricity. I don't want to say sometimes in India because it's not true. Like some places in India have electricity 24/7 and some places don't. But unfortunately, my house has been giving some trouble today.
No, no problem. It happens all around the world, but also it is the context that we're in, and people get to experience that live with us. Um, let's talk about the role of education in helping bridge the gap for women, for girls all around the world.
Right, and I think that question that you're asking also kind of seamlessly segues into a question which is on a question chat, which says, "How do you suggest bridging the miscommunications and gap in understanding the plight of the marginalized people?" I think both the questions together are excellent. I think it's very important, basically, to try and make sure that there's a way that somebody who's privileged can find time to connect to somebody who's been marginalized. The system of private schools and public schools and the segregation of private schools and public schools has, in a way, not been the best in terms of that. So, there is a certain kind of socioeconomic background that goes to a certain kind of school, and there's a different kind of socioeconomic background that goes to another kind of school. So in a way, if that is a reality that we have to live with, then that's something which we have to deal with. But maybe there have to be ways of connecting these two groups of people. And for now, I would suggest, try and send, or people who are interested in wanting to know more, or schools like undergrad schools or grad schools, which want their students to have an experience to know more about marginalized populations, try and do more voluntary work, try and connect with these marginalized groups. And I understand that during this time, during COVID-19, during pandemic, when, just travel by itself is such a challenge, just going and being and having a chat with somebody is such a challenge. How do we achieve that? So I also think that, the online platform is a wonderful tool to do that. We do this through our online platform on the Azadi Project. We train refugee men and women in skills, in hygiene sensitization, in gender equity, sitting in different parts of the world, gathering the refugees in a space where there is Wi-Fi, talking to them, different volunteers from different parts of the world who've never had an experience of communicating with a refugee person gets to do that. So I think there's a need for more such platforms to encourage these discussions, to encourage these kind of interactions where the two groups understand each other, where they know that there is so much that is similar between the two different groups, while understanding the differences and the differences in the backgrounds that they come from.
Hmm. And the focus on training now is really big for you, because we're talking about an economy that's changing and the world of work that's changing. So I know that there is a focus not only in the Azadi Project but all over now, especially because of this pandemic, to help people develop new skills in this new era of employment that we're experiencing. We're in an era where certain industry sectors are dying, certain jobs are dying, but we're also experiencing the birth of new jobs that require new types of skills. And the way we get um, more people trained in these types of skills is through digital technology. So I think it's really smart of you to be using that to have more access to underprivileged people in order to have them learn these types of skills, and that's what you're using now in these refugee camps.
Right. So we focus, and Farouk, thanks for raising that, because I think I almost missed that. We use digital skills and digital technology and target it towards training for livelihood training. So what we try to do is give the refugee women skills that they can use to have access to employment, sitting in a refugee camp, sitting in a shelter, mm-hmm. in whichever part of the world. So if they learn skills of online communication, if they learn skills of website designing, of coding, or of, filmmaking, they could be doing freelance or contract work for any organization. It could be in any country in Europe. It could be the US, it could be Canada. They don't have to necessarily have a work permit in a country which is in a new host country where documentation, asylum seek. We're giving them online skills, digital, in a way which doesn't restrict them to geographical boundaries and work with the country that they are in. And we started this 2 years ago, but now we realize that during a pandemic, this is all the more important because everybody is online right now. So how much more can this be leveraged? How much more can we give, use these communities or give these communities these skills? And how can we connect them to people who are looking to hire, most companies have a quota that they want to hire a certain kind, to give this a percentage of their jobs to certain people coming from disadvantaged groups. So I think to make that connection is something that we are trying to do, and if we can get the support of others, that would be great. And having said that, I also want to talk about one of the women who was part of a woman from Iran, and we trained her in Athens, just to give you all an example of how these women have used these skills and how they are using it to not just enhance their own lives, but also enhance lives of other women. So this woman, refugee woman from Iran, when she walked into our workshop, she didn't speak a word of English. She could only speak Farsi and a little bit of Greek. And over the 2 weeks that we trained her, that she, spent time with us.
Priyali?
She learned how to make films. She was drawn towards camera. Her writing in Farsi was extremely strong, very
Priyali?
poetic writing, very, she could tell a story in a very beautiful way. And within 6 months, she was using the equipment we had left behind for her to not tell stories only of refugee women in Athens or in Greece. Sorry.
Priyali, the sound is breaking up really badly, so I'm not sure if you're able to perhaps log out and then log back in, because we're having a hard time hearing you. While you do this,
yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but you're fading in and out. So while you try to get sound back, let me just talk a little bit about the future of migration. And what I want to share with everyone is that what Priyali was just talking about right now, is the future of migration. That in the past, people had to cross seas to apply for visas, to move to different countries, leave everything behind, their social capital, their families, the environments that they grew up with, their cultures, the food that they love to have. And certainly I'm one example of that, is somebody who has had to do all of that to come and seek different type of education and environment and life. I think the future of migration now post COVID-19 is going to look different, as we attempt to give more of the future work skills to everyone around the world. And when more people are educated with and have the skills in hand to be able to work in different environments, and they know the language, they know the technical skills, they know coding, they know all of these things, just as Priyali was saying, that they might not need to leave their homes and their families and their societies, that they can work from India or from Pakistan or from North Africa or South Africa, from any country where they live in, and still earn a living, because now most of the work can be done remotely. What needs to happen for this is really for policies and for laws to catch up. But as laws change and it allows more companies from around the world to recruit people to work remotely from around the world, I think what you will see is that migration will look differently, and in my opinion, I think it's a more positive thing, because believe me, not everybody, like most people, don't want to leave their homes and their families. They do this so out of necessity. This is not, they're not chasing necessarily a dream. They're having to escape a reality that is less desirable. So we're talking about the future of migration and how migration is going to change around the world as a result of more access to skills via digital technology and education. That applies to women, to girls, and perhaps, just perhaps, less people will have to be refugees. Less people would have to migrate, unless they are fleeing, obviously, wars and dangerous situations. So that is the proposition that I'm on the table.
Yeah, can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'll keep my video off. Hopefully this will help. Yes, so, just generally, even if we don't look at the migrant community, even if we don't look at refugee community, in the digital world or in the digital sector, you see that it's mostly dominated by men. There's a huge requirement for women to be part of the digital sector in terms of coding or digital skills employment. So when it comes to refugee women, there's all the more need, because there are these companies, there are these organizations which are actually wanting to hire more women. And so if those jobs can be, if those jobs are out there waiting, and if we can train women and migrant and refugee women to access those jobs, to have access to jobs, to apply for those jobs, then I think it's going to be revolutionary in terms of firstly, connecting people who are looking for jobs to livelihoods. Then in terms of migration, it will definitely if this is a successful model, it will definitely have an impact on people who are moving in terms of better livelihoods, or who we call the economic migrants. But if it is people who are moving as refugees, as the Refugee Convention states that a refugee is somebody who's fleeing persecution or who has a threat, no way stopped, right? Because if it's unsafe in the place where they are, they anyway have to flee. And to top it, now we have climate change. So there are going to be lots of what is an informal term, climate refugees or climate migrants, which people don't like to use that term as much. But people who are displaced because of climate change, because their lands have been lost, their livelihoods have been lost, their agricultural land has been submerged. Just today, I was speaking to a family in the northeast part of India, where there's been a lot of flood. And the northeast part of India is bordering Bangladesh, and we all know that Bangladesh is one of the countries which is going to be the worst impacted by climate change. And so one of the states in India, which is Assam, which is very close to Bangladesh, has floods every year. So I was speaking to a family there, and they said that every year their house, the land on which their house has been built, faces erosion, and so every year they have to rebuild their house. And they worked as farmers on an agricultural land, and this time in this recent flood, even that agricultural land has been taken away. So ultimately these people will be forced to move. Either they will be internally displaced people, or if they have the means, they will move to another country. Even in 2015, 2016, when we saw the massive movement of migration of people from the Middle East to Europe, there were some people who were coming from the South Asia, but very few, but there were people coming from Pakistan and some people from Bangladesh. And I happened to interview some of them in Hungary and Croatia. And these people said that, they were forced to leave Bangladesh to move to countries like Turkey, Greece, and then from there looking for better opportunities to move to Europe. So ideally, they will be termed as economic migrants because they moved not because there is a threat of life in their land, but there is no way of living in their country because they don't have access to anything. So, these people are somewhere in that gray area. What are we going to do about them, right? So mostly what my thought is, and this gets into the technical part of the Refugee Convention, that really needs to be revised to bring in people who are going to be affected by climate change, because that is mostly going to be our biggest threat.
I so appreciate this, Priyali. In our last minute or two, I would love to get a sense from you, just basically if you could describe the future in either a word or an image that comes to mind.
In a word or an image, I see, well, the future, I think, is a gender equal world, and I hope that's not far in the future, but in the very near future. And I hope women and men don't have to be out on the streets asking for their rights. And, I hope there aren't, as the Me Too's and all those movements, or Black Lives Matter movement, all these movements happen because there's a need for these, because there's people have no other option but to be out on the streets asking for what they rightly deserve. I hope we live in a world where everybody gets what they rightly deserve. I know that's like a utopia, and that's probably very far-fetched, but there is no harm in hoping.
I so love that image, and the one that comes to mind for me is a world where the risk involved in designing one's life doesn't involve risking one's life and personal safety, especially for women. And I hope that we will reach that day very soon. Um, Priyali, you have been just a tremendous guest today. I'm sorry that you've experienced some technological issues in the past, but it is a live show, and that's what we get. And as we branch out and bring people from all over the world, we will just roll with it with these situations. But I think your message came across quite well, and for me, I think what I've been impacted by in this conversation. Is the idea that life design involves a pursuit of curiosity and of inspiration of dreams, and involves a certain element of risk. Everyone has to take a certain level of risk in order to do this. Um, but it shouldn't, that risk shouldn't involve personal safety and a person risking their lives and potentially dying or being raped. And the reality is that people are designing their lives by crossing seas in very dangerous situations and borders. And if we need to empathize with them from that perspective, is that what they are doing is at its most basic essence, no different from the person who is being an entrepreneur and starting a new project. But the risk level is just so high for them, and it's quite descriptive of the context that they come from. And the second thing that has hit me during this conversation is that migration is going to change as a result of this pandemic, of technology, of more hopefully people having access to learning skills. And it's our responsibility to scale this process of teaching and educating people all around the world. But I feel like that I think that we're going to see different trends around migration in the future, and we have to be proactive to make sure that we create a certain level of equity and equality in that process. It's been a fascinating conversation. We will have it recorded, posted on YouTube very soon. And I want to remind everyone, as I thank Priyali for this amazing conversation. Thank you again, Priyali. There's only one certain vision for the future, and it's the one that you create. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.
Thanks, Farouk. Thanks, everyone. Bye.